Well, this is super fun. This is Lunch Bites, which is our weekly half an hour snippet that we're covering different exciting things that are happening within our offerings at Western Washington University. So we're delighted to be joined today by Dr. Mark Staton, who Serafima is going to intro.
Yeah.
Yay.
And I'll pass it over to you, Serafima.
Cool. So Mark Staton is a professor of marketing at Western Washington University. He's also the director for the MBA and graduate programs for the College of Business and Economics. He is also an awesome advisor for students and is one of the favorite marketing professors at Western for his digital marketing class and marketing strategy classes. Also has great taste in music. So
Cool. Awesome. Okay. Meg, thank you so much for having me. Serafima, thank you for the nice introduction. Again, I'm Mark Staton. I have been at Western Washington University since 2012. My name is Mark Staton. I've been at Western since 2012. I teach, in the past, I've taught marketing research and principles of marketing for the undergraduates. I currently teach, as well as marketing management for the MBAs. I currently teach digital marketing in the undergraduate program and marketing strategy in the MBA program. So marketing strategy generally is this sort of the second marketing class, and we'll kind of go over a little bit about that. So I've been director of the MBA program since 2017, and I'm really excited to speak to you guys today about marketing. It's funny, marketing is a topic that everybody thinks they know a lot about because they're sort of surrounded by it. And so I used to teach, when I taught principles of marketing for the undergraduates, I would say, everybody raise your hand if you know something about marketing. And it would take a couple, and like people shy and they wouldn't do it. And I was like, everybody knows something. So think about what you think marketing is, raise your hand. There's no wrong answer to this. And then it took some coaxing, and I eventually got all 65 undergraduates to put their hand up in the air. And then I said, put your hand down if you're thinking about commercials. And then like, whoop, they all go down. And so when we think about marketing, that's sort of the first thing people think about a lot. But one of the things that I wanted to sort of go over in this framework that I'm going to introduce to you is the idea that commercials and promotion is literally the last thing you do when it comes to marketing and marketing strategy. There's a lot of steps that happen before that, and we're going to go through those sort of particular steps. So again, my background prior to Western, I was a Southern United States history major. I never took an undergraduate business class in my undergraduate experience. I then worked in advertising for a few years and learned about sort of the basics of advertising and marketing there. And then worked in the internet space for a little while, got laid off from the internet space because that's what happened in the early 2000s. And then when I was getting my MBA, the first class, my first day of, actually wasn't my first day, but like one of my first days of marketing in my first semester, the professor said, marketing is applied social science. And that's when I was like, oh, that's why I like marketing so much. Because if you think about sort of, if, structural engineering is applied physics, or, statistics is applied mathematics, marketing is applied social science. And so, to be a good marketer, you really do need to understand, a little bit about all the different disciplines. You need to understand psychology, you need to understand sociology, you need to understand anthropology, you need to understand economics, you need to understand history, all these different things. And that, and just sort of why people do things, that's what a marketer should understand. And then I'll do one more anecdote before I sort of go into my little framework lecture here. But a few years ago, I'm not quite sure how it happened, but back when people were allowed to get in groups of large people, I was asked to be part of this sort of like Bellingham entrepreneurial competition. It was like Bellingham Shark Tank, and it was at the Underground nightclub. Nightclubs were places where people used to congregate and listen to music and drink alcohol, but we can't do that anymore. And it was like Wednesday at like a 5:30, so it was like they weren't going to do anything else at that point. And so I was a judge, and so one of the other judges, was this big, huge guy, and he was this VP of sales for some company, and he was very proud of himself. He walked around sort of a big way, and he looked at my name tag, and he goes, and it said it said Mark Staton, PhD or something, Western Washington University, and he goes, "Where'd you get your PhD?" And I said, "I got it from the University of Washington." And he goes, "I got a PhD from the School of Hard Knocks." I was like, "Whoa, okay, aggro guy, what's your story?" And then he's like, I work my way up, in sales. I know everything you need to know about marketing. Tell me something about marketing that I don't know. I was like, "You need one thing?" And he said, "Sure." And I said, and this is sort of the global thing I want you guys to know about from this talk, is that marketing strategy is figuring out, one, what you do better than everybody else, and two, who's willing to buy that. And once you've figured out those two things, everything else sort of falls into place. And so when I told my friend, the PhD from the School of Hard Knocks, that little thing, that's like my elevator speech about, or quote for marketing strategy, he was like, "Oh, that's pretty good. I like that." So he sort of chilled out a little bit. All right. So when we talk about marketing, and just so you know, I'm in my basement right now, and it took me a while to sort of figure out how I was going to teach. And it was about midway through the summer quarter that I moved into this room that had been our guest bedroom. And then check this out. I'm very proud of this. I bought whiteboard paint, so I can write on my wall, and I can walk around. And Seraphine has taken a couple classes with me, and she knows that I'm kind of a wanderer. And so for the first quarter, when I was teaching, and I was like sitting in that chair, it was super annoying. And so now I get to walk around a little bit. And I have a second computer over here that shows me what y'all are seeing. So now I can really walk around. But basically, marketing is three things. And it's sort of analysis, strategy, and implementation. Okay, can you see that? Yeah. Analysis, you do this first, and then once you do the analysis, you do the marketing strategy, and once you do the marketing strategy, then you go into this, the implementation. Wow, this looks like a really goofy Hawaiian shirt. Okay, all right. So when we talk about marketing, another phrase that you hear a lot, and I like to give credit where credit's due. This framework that we're talking about here, this was developed by a gentleman named Philip Kotler. And so Philip Kotler was a marketing professor at Northwestern University forever. And he kind of developed this in the 1960s. And it's been surprisingly effective in describing marketing over the last 60 or so years. So, or 50 or so years. So again, I like to study history. And so I like the fact that this guy Kotler is the one who came up with this. They actually make reference to this in Mad Men in one of the episodes with this evil MBA. All right, so when we talk about analysis, all these things got little other nicknames. So analysis is also known as the 5 C's. And I'll talk about what each of those are in a second. 5 C's. Strategy is also known as STP, which for any NASCAR fans that are watching is not a motor oil. Something else that I'll explain in a second. And then implementation is also known as the 4 C's. I also know that sorry, spaced out. 4 P's, that was dumb. 4 P's. I also acknowledge the fact that I'm using an apostrophe incorrectly. So don't ding me for that. All right, so when we do, so like I was saying, that the marketing promotion part of it is the last thing, and so we'll get to that. But when we talk about a market analysis, this is the first thing you do. When we talk about a market analysis, it's really figuring out what does the world look like that you're trying to market your product within. And so there's a couple of different things here. So the first thing, the most important thing, is your customers. So, and I'll go into a little more detail about each of these in a second. I'm just gonna write them out now. So the sort of the lodestar, your true north when you're doing your market analysis is the customers and their needs. So the next one is the company, is your company. And what are your skills? What are the things that you, like I said before, what are the things you do better than anybody else? The next one is competition. Who are your competitors? What are their skills? And something that I'll hit when we talk about this is that our competitors are often not necessarily what we think they are. It's who our customers think could potentially solve the same, serve the same need. So we've got the customer, the company, the competition, our collaborators. Who do we work with? And then finally, the context. So let's go into those again. So just to reiterate, customers, company, competition, collaborators, and context. All right, I've walked around a little bit. Now I'm gonna sit down. So, so when we talk about customers, there's a lot of people think about customers just purely in sort of quantifiable demographic terms. So when I talk about quantifiable demographic terms, what I'm talking about is like age, gender, location, income, things like that. When you're doing a market analysis, those things are really important, but there's lots of other things that are sort of important as well. And the thing that I always think about that is sort of specifically when we're doing this market analysis is the idea of customer needs. It doesn't matter if, like, I'm gonna keep throwing it back to Seraphima here because she's a buddy of mine, but like Seraphima and I demographically don't share a lot. She's much cooler than I am. She's much younger than I am. She's much shorter than I am, but we both like listening to vinyl. So we have like sort of this interesting sort of customer need that's similar. And so a lot of times, so in a lot of ways, if you're sort of in the record selling business, communicating with Seraphima and with me would be fairly similar because we share that similar need. And so thinking about what the customer need is really important in terms of your marketing strategy. And then it makes you sort of think less about the demographics and more sort of about what we refer to as psychographics. What are the values? What are the interests? What are the more qualitative ways that we can sort of separate our customers into different groups? A big thing to think about in terms of the customer analysis is really just sort of like the decision-making unit, sometimes referred to as the DMU. And an important thing to think about, and I know we're not gonna have a lot of people talking right now, and so I'll just sort of ask questions and then answer them. But when we talk about the decision-making unit, what we're talking about is that often there's not just one person that's part of a purchase. When we talk about a decision-making unit, we're basically talking about who's the purchaser, who's the user, who's the influencer, who's the initiator. There's all these different sort of people, and you can do different marketing strategies based on different examples of the decision-making unit. When I talk about in my classes, I'll say, you know, what's an example of where the purchaser and the user are two different people? And when everyone raises their hands and everyone says the same thing, Meg, what am I going to say?
Parent-child something.
Toys, exactly. That's the one. So when you're, and so I know Meg's got kids too. So like that basically, kids want toys that their friends think are cool and that look cool on the commercial or whatever. Their kids don't watch TV anymore, but like whatever. So yeah, if kids want things that are cool. Parents want things that are somehow like they can at least pretend are educational. And so, so a marketing strategy would be very different depending on whom they're targeting within the decision-making unit. And since we're all adults here and we're all grown up and we can talk about things without giggling, an example of this in my marketing strategy class, I do a case specifically talking about sort of decision-making unit strategy around Cialis and Viagra. And it's a somewhat old case, but basically Viagra, we all know what Viagra is, and Viagra was the first one to come out and it, you know, created this huge market. And Cialis was sort of the challenger that came in. And one of the things that Cialis did differently than Viagra, I mean, there were some product differences in terms of efficacy and things like that. But one of the things from a marketing strategy standpoint that they did differently was that they targeted the partners as opposed to the patients. And so that's an example of sort of thinking in terms of decision-making unit. You know, so you want to know, you know, when you sort of think about the different parts of the customer, you want to think about, you know, how do they search for information? At this point, it's basically Google. You know, what attributes of a product are most important to them? If it's kids, it's that the toy looks cool and makes a lot of noise. If it's parents, it's usually price and educational and does not make a lot of noise. Where do the different customers shop? You know, how important is their problems? You really, you know, part of being a marketer is, and this comes back to that social science aspect that I was saying before, is that the marketer's role is to be the expert on the different types of customers. Actually, the marketer's role is to be the expert on the market. And, you know, and the reason why I put it at 12 o'clock, you know, the customers really are king. And so really understanding who the customers are and what the different groups and things like that is a big part of a market analysis. So the next thing is the company analysis. And so when I say company analysis, it's like I said before, it's really understanding what your firm's strengths and weaknesses are. And so, and like I said about that gentleman at the Sharky Tanky thingy, was that you want to target segments that are aligned with your strengths. And so when we talk about that, you know, a big phrase that you hear a lot in marketing is core competency. So, you know, a firm generally has a core competency that they're sort of, you know, that this is what they are really good at. If you're Nike, it's really, you know, they're really good at brand building. If it's 3M, they're really good at making stuff that sticks. You know, and so, you know, every firm, you really need to think about what is it that we do better than anybody else. And so, and you know, it's funny, I spent a lot of time, as one would imagine, thinking about the marketing strategy of the Western Washington University MBA program. And I think about how Western generally and CBE sort of specifically, or the MBA program specifically, we really care a lot about instruction. We really care a lot about sort of faculty-student interaction. And so I feel like that's what we really try to sell. And then we'll talk about that sort of in a little bit when we get back to the strategy part of it. But then you know, really understanding what you're good at is a really important part of sort of your market analysis, because if you know, you have to be sort of, you know, really sort of self-aware to be a good marketer. See what you're really good at. So the third one, down there around, I don't know, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, is the competitive analysis. And so when we do a competitive analysis, what we're talking about is, looking at the same way that we look at ourselves, we look at our competitors, and what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses. Obviously, you don't really want to compete on their strength. It's better to compete on their weakness. It's also a good idea to understand what their objectives are. I think that if you're competing against Apple, you sort of understand that their objective is to sell high margin products when we're talking about hardware stuff. And so that's their objective, where a company like Dell, when they're making laptops, is more about volume and sort of lower profit margins and things like that. So sort of understanding what their objectives are, will help you figure out how to compete within there. And then and so understanding sort of what they're the fact that you're not going to act necessarily in a vacuum, that what you're going to do, they're going to do, react to, and vice versa, is a really important of marketing as well. But again, like I was saying before, one of the things that's really important to think about when you talk about competition is it's not necessarily like one of the things I talk about a lot on my first day is the difference between a market orientation and a product orientation. So a lot of companies think in terms of a product orientation, which is they compete basically just in terms of the other companies that do similar things to them. Where a market orientation is more sort of customer focused, where you're trying to serve the different needs, and then you kind of have to figure out the right, and then you realize that your competition is much wider if you think in terms of a market orientation. I've had conversations in the past with the Bellingham Bells, and I think they're a great team and a good time, and I'm very sad that we couldn't go to any games this summer. But what's really important from a marketing standpoint for the Bells is when they're competing for audience, they're not competing against, I can guarantee they're the #1 baseball team in Bellingham, bar none, because they're kind of the only one. But when they're competing against all the other things someone could do with their discretionary time and money. So, that's part of the reason why they do as much stuff as they do around sort of beer and things like that, because they know that a lot of the people that could go to their games could also go to sit outside at a bar. We got a lot of bars and breweries in Bellingham. And so they have a much more market orientation in terms of the sort of their competitive set, to use sort of an MBA framework. Collaborators is, when we consider collaborators, we usually think of them as sort of either downstream or upstream. But basically, when we talk about collaborators, it's who are the third parties that help us deliver our value to our customers. And so, and when we talk about sort of upstream, we're talking about suppliers. And when we're talking about downstream, we're often thinking about in terms of sort of retail partners and things like that. But, collaborators can be lots of different things. And so, I think I talk about with the students all the time, collaborators for Western Washington University are, examples of that would be the off-campus housing. Most of the students that go to Western don't live in on-campus housing, so these private landlords are collaborators for Western Washington in terms of delivering their value. You could I don't think it's a shock to say that a lot of people at Western ski and snowboard. So I think that Mount Baker is a collaborator when it comes to Western Washington University. And so like, that whole sort of Bellingham community are all collaborators with Western. One of the things I always find really interesting is oftentimes our collaborators are also our competitors. And that negotiation can be really tough. And so like, just go back to my example from a couple minutes ago, the Bellingham Bells, one of their sponsors is Boundary Bay. And you can get Boundary Bay beer when you go to a Bells game. But you could also, the same people that could go to a Bells game could also theoretically go to Boundary Bay instead. And so they are sort of competitors at the same time they're collaborators. So then you've got sort of wholesale costs and things like that. So it's all about negotiations and business development, things like that. But it's always important to realize that there generally are third parties that help you deliver the value that you're promising, and those collaborators and having good relationships with those collaborators is a big part of your market analysis. And then the last one is the context. And this is sort of all the exogenous things that could affect your market. And so, and when we talk about context, I'm going to write this in big letters. So context goes down here. P-E-S-T-E-L. Pestle analysis. See that? P-E-S-T-E-L. So these are not necessarily an exhaustive list of some of the contextual factors that can have a big impact on your marketing success. So P stands for the political context. E stands for the economic context. S is the socio-cultural context. T is the technological context. E, the second E, is the environmental context, and L is the legal context. And I'm not a lawyer, nor am I a public policy person, but I think these can actually be kind of connected. I'm not quite sure how you would say that one is different than the other. And they're all, I'm a big fan of the Venn diagram. So, and a lot of these things can sort of fit into more than one thing. But I'm sure we can all think of situations where the political context impacts the market. Certain things that were, could have been successful before in a different political setting become less successful now. I don't want to get too much into that. Economic context is kind of obvious as well. I definitely feel for our millennial friends who, I graduated from my, I first was on the job market in the fall of 2008. And I was actually pretty far along in the Western hiring process, and then there was a hiring freeze. And then, that's why it's a couple of years before I got here. But the idea that sort of we're in this sort of second big economic calamity, obviously that has a big impact on a lot of marketers. The socio-cultural context, society is always changing, culture is always changing. And again, a lot of times, these things are, when we talk about the socio-cultural context, we have sort of fads, if I could make a reference to our older friends. Like in the 70s, there was this thing called pet rocks, and like people bought lots of pet rocks. Literally, they were rocks they called pets. It was really stupid. And there's always fads that become really popular. I remember in the 90s, I was convinced I somehow got my hands on a couple of Furbies. I was like, oh, sweet, now my retirement is all set, I have Furbies. That didn't work out. But then you have sort of the trends, and then so trends are sort of longer lasting than fads. And so you think about trends, and that can be sort of connected to other factors as well, and that sort of drives things in a much more longer lasting way. And then you have mega trends, and those are generally more sort of generational. Obviously from a marketing standpoint, the baby boom generation really sort of had this very outsized impact for decades, and then the millennial and Gen Z generations are much more sort of ethnically diverse, much more sort of inclusive. And so you're seeing a lot of brands that are really, sort of that are going after the Gen Z and millennial audience, really sort of pushing their support for Black Lives Matter and these sort of political issues in a way that they wouldn't before, because that's the type of thing that their customers are really wanting to latch onto. Weird little snippet that sort of gets into the trend thing. I once read this paper, I think it was Journal of Consumer Research, that basically found that when the economy is lousy, they compared sort of GDP growth, these economists, they compared GDP growth with the beats per minute of the Billboard 100 for the year. And what they found was this correlation between when the GDP was going down or was growing slower, the beats per minute got faster. So basically, you have the Depression, and then you have big band music. And then you have sort of stagflation of the 70s, and then you have disco. And then you have sort of the 2000s recession, and then you have EDM. So I guess what I'm saying is you should probably buy stock in EDM festivals right now. Probably good bet. So then the technological stuff, obviously technology is constantly changing things. I always get a kick out of when I buy something 10 years, like things I don't buy very regularly, and then how what had been sort of, wow, this is really like a point of difference in the past, now becomes sort of a point of parity just because everybody has it. So just because your product's sort of cutting edge right now, there's going to be a technological change fairly soon that you're going to have to react to, and that becomes the second part of it. That becomes what you have to be. You have to be aware of that. And then, like I said, the last part is legal, and when laws change, you need to react to that as well. So there you go. So that's the market analysis. And so the 5 C's are really important. You got to do those first, and you got to do them regularly, because you can't really come up with a good marketing strategy, which is the whole point of this talk, unless you have a really good understanding of what the market looks like. And so understanding the customer, your company, your competitors, your collaborators, and your context really help you sort of figure out what your strategy should be. All right, so now we did the first part, the market analysis, and now we're going to the second part. This is strategy. STP. Again, we're not talking about motor oil. Richard Petty drove the STP car back in the day, and that Bubba Wallace guy, no, he's a, forget that part, but like STP stands for segmentation, targeting, and positioning. Segmentation, targeting, and positioning. So basically, when we talk about segmentation, we're getting back to this sort of customer analysis. This idea that we have lots of customers, lots of potential customers, and then we need to basically segment them into specific groups. And then, and generally speaking, we fit those, there's lots of different ways that we do it. It's like we were saying before, you can do them sort of quantitatively, you can do them more qualitatively. But it's important to have the different groups because, I think it's the sound of sounding, at the risk of sounding slightly flip, we know that it's really hard to be all things to all people. And so again, sort of figuring out what the different groups are allows us to figure out which groups we can, wait for it, target better for us and more successfully for us. So when we talk about segmentation, this is the sort of the nerdy phrase I like to use. A market segment or customer segment is maximally similar within the segment, as similar as possible for all the people within it, but then maximally different from all the other segments. So, and so when we talk about segments, it's important to think about, what are the criteria you're looking at, and then also really thinking about like what's the sort of the difference in behavior of those people. You could in theory create a soda and have and target specifically blue-eyed people versus brown-eyed people, but it'd be kind of a waste of time because I don't think there's anything that would suggest that blue-eyed people and brown-eyed people have different preferences in sodas. So just because you can create different segments doesn't necessarily mean it has any value. So then once we think about the different segments, I'm flipping my notes. Then the second part is this targeting. And so, so the big question is, you've got these different segments. Which segment or segments do you want to target? And then you want to think about, and you don't have to just pick one. There's plenty of examples of firms that we're all familiar with that have multiple segments that they target. We call that differentiated marketing. And even we in the MBA program do stuff like that. And so, but then when we talk about examples of how markets are segment, it's like all the things we're saying. Demographic, geographic, lifestyle, values. But in my mind, the best way to create a segment or to target a segment is not based on any of those demographic or psychographic things. It's just on behavior. Because when we talk about behavioral segmentation or behavioral targeting, that's essentially all those other ones, demographics or something. Those are proxies for behavior. And that's to do a little, I'm doing a talk next Thursday on digital marketing. And that's one of the reasons why digital marketing is so cool, is that we don't really care about demographics, we care about behavior. And that's why it gets slightly creepy. But like, I buy a lot of sneakers. Okay, I buy vinyl and sneakers. Okay, I sound like a real joker now. But like my Instagram feed is all these sponsored posts of sneakers, because they know that when they show me an ad and I click on it, and while I may not exactly be the coolest looking guy in the world, they don't care. They just care that I buy sneakers, and so they're able to track that sort of behavior. And so behavioral targeting is probably the sort of the smartest thing to do, and it's that much easier with digital marketing. But when we talk about targeting, you should target a market that is aligned with your and your collaborators' strengths, is aligned with the goals of your company. You have the resources to connect with, and you can make money serving. And so here's a little personal story. When I became director of the MBA program, it was a couple of months before our current dean, Scott Young, came from DePaul University. Great guy, smart guy, and had really good experience with the MBA program at DePaul. And so then he came to me and he said, have you ever heard of this thing called the MBA Tour? And I said, what's that? And he said, it's an organization that sort of goes and creates these essentially MBA information fairs at different cities around the world. And he goes, DePaul, usually gets a lot of good students from that. He had a good experience with that. And he goes, you should do that. And I said, okay, we'll give it a shot. And so I, 2 or 3 years ago, did the MBA tour in East Asia. And so we went to Tokyo, Tokyo, Seoul, Taiwan, Beijing, and Shanghai. And we went to different fairs, and we didn't get a whole lot of interest from any of the people there. It was, we put ourselves out there. We learned that this is not the right promotional vehicle for us. And so this was sort of, like I said, this was kind of early in my career as the MBA director. And and what I learned was the best target market for the Western MBA program are people who are connected to Western and or Bellingham. So people who have undergraduate degrees from Western, whatever they are, they don't have to be CBE. They can be in any part. They can work for Western. They can live in Bellingham, gone someplace else. But all of those things, is this aligned with your and your collaborator strengths? Bellingham is a big part of our strength. Bellingham's a pretty dope place to live. And so if you know that, you're more likely to want to come to school here. Is it aligned with the goals of your company? You know, these are the people that we want to serve. Do we have the resources to connect with? Guess what? We have all their email addresses. Guess what? We can mail them stuff. So, you know, the more that we've, and, you know, can you make money serving them? Yes, we can. And so all of the, you know, so a real large part of sort of my role as the director of the MBA program is thinking, and it has been to sort of reconfigure our marketing strategy around who our target market should be and what our positioning should be. And it really is sort of focused on that sort of Bellingham Western connection. All right, so then we talk about segmentation, we talk about targeting. The last part of strategy, and this is in many ways the most fun part, is the creating of the product positioning. And so I want to make sure I do this right. Again, to sort of date, you know, here's the guy that makes the Pet Rocks references. This is a lot like writing a Mad Lib, if anyone remembers Mad Libs from back in the day. I'm gonna erase some stuff here, excuse me. I gotta do it over here. So there are a couple different ways to do a product positioning, but this is sort of a really basic one. Our product / brand is single most important claim among all competitive frame of reference because single most important support. No, this is really boring, sorry. Okay. You know, these are the Mad Libs that we fill in. So our product brand is single most important claim among all competitive frame of reference because single most important support. So what can we say? Let's say the WWU MBA program single most important claim, best value for your money among all Washington State MBA programs because single most important support. You know, some piece of evidence that would support this because, you know, we have smart leadership. Okay, as you can tell, I just kind of made this up. But you know, this is what you're trying to do. And the important thing here is that you talk about that single most important claim. Again, what is the customer need that you're trying to serve? The competitive frame of reference, that's, you know, who are all the different things that your potential customer is trying to sort of compare you against. And then finally, you know, the single most important support. You know, what is it, you know, what's evidence that you have to support that claim? And so, you know, hopefully do a better job than I did. But, you know, that one sentence, that one positioning statement has a really big impact in terms of the sort of what the next and final step here, which is called the marketing implementation. So the marketing implementation is referred to as the 4 Ps. And so when we do the 4 Ps, that refers to the product, the price, the placement, and then the promotion. So the product, that's what you sell. What is it, the product that, and product, and this is a very sort of big picture phrase referring to product or service or whatever you're doing. We know who are sort of the customers that we have that we want to serve in the MBA program. And so we have basically 3 different products. We have a full-time, daytime MBA program, which is for the phrase that we use, early career people. There's generally people who are just finished undergrad and want to get that one extra credential before they get out in the workforce, but they have the time because they don't have jobs to do it full-time during the day. The second one we have is our evening MBA program here in Bellingham, which meets Tuesdays and Thursday nights and is for older working professionals. And then our third one is what we call our weekend MBA program, and that's actually in Everett at the University Center over by Everett Community College. And that meets Friday afternoons and then all day Saturday, every other weekend. And that, while it's not exclusively that, it's traditionally been a sort of a plurality of the students there are employees of Boeing and their suppliers. So we've created sort of 3 different products around 3 different target markets. So price, it's kind of obvious. You want to price correctly, and so a big part of price is sort of figuring out who are your customers and what are they willing to pay, or who are your target customers and what are they willing to pay. And so pricing is a pretty fascinating topic. One of the excellent marketing professors here at Western is Kat Armstrong-Soul, and she teaches a class called People and Money, and it's all sort of about behavioral economics and the different things that go into pricing strategies, among other things. But your price, people don't really think about this, but your price is this real sort of huge signal to the market as to what you're promising to deliver and who you want your target market to be, or who your target market is, rather. Placement, here's a little dirty secret about the Kotler framework. When he talks about placement, when we're talking about placement, he's really talking about distribution channels. And so I think that as a good marketer, he realized that the 4 Ps sounded a lot cooler than the 3 Ps and the distribution channel. So he was like, well, I don't know what it's called. I don't know. Placement. Yeah, there we go. So placement is how people get stuff. And if you think about it, there's a lot, because of the internet, there's a lot more direct sales. I have a former student named Brian Haug who works in analytics for Nike. And it's fascinating the amount of customer data they have, because every year, the percentage of their shoes that are sold wholesale through, via wholesale through third parties versus sold directly on Nike.com and the app. Like the percentage of direct digital sales just goes up and up every year. They have all this more data. But one of the things about, a lot of times marketers will think, hey, if I eliminate these sort of intermediaries and sell direct to the customer, I increase my profit margins. But the problem is that if you eliminate the intermediary, you have to do all the stuff the intermediary does, and sometimes they're better at it than you are. So while the revenue might be higher, your profit can go down. Kind of strange. But thinking a lot about who your customers are and where they shop, or where they're comfortable shopping, that means placement is a big part of what you do. And lastly, like I was saying before, the last thing you really need to think about is promotion. So that thing that I said, at the jump about like, put your hand down if you're thinking about advertising, that's what I'm talking about here. Advertising is a lot of people think, oh, let's do this, this, and this with our ads or a promotional strategy, but it really is sort of, you have to do all this other stuff first before you come up with a promotional strategy. I don't know about you, but I'm a big sports fan too. You guys learned a lot about me right now. And the sports scene has been kind of dreary the last few months. But my son and I have gotten really into the NBA playoffs. And so we've been watching the NBA playoffs a lot the last couple nights. And there are a lot of ads for Toyota, and we pay attention. I guess we pay attention because we have a highlighter and a Prius. Yeah, I'm a Bellingham University professor with a Prius. So we see these ads, and what's funny, Hunter and I were talking about how the fact that the people in the ads are all these sort of cool looking 20-somethings, but the songs in the ads are all like songs that I like. And so I was telling him that I think in a lot of ways, if you want to get the target market of a car ad, it's not the people in the ads, it's the music in the ads. And so, so Toyota sort of understands their target market really well, and selects the music within the ads as kind of a clue. One of the things because I'm a dork about this stuff, one of the things I like to do is when I see an ad, I try and in my head reverse engineer the marketing strategy. So who's the target market? What's the frame of reference? What's the sort of the most important claim? We call this often the point of difference. And I don't know if I'm being right or not, but I do that all the time. And it's and obviously it's easier to do it with a TV commercial than with a Google ad or something like that. But you can still sort of figure out stuff with the digital stuff. Speaking of the digital stuff, if you found this conversation interesting, next Thursday, I think I'm doing the same talk. I'm not the same talk, but at the same time, I'm going to be doing a talk on digital marketing, and I will teach you everything you need to know about digital marketing in less than an hour. That's not true. I won't teach you everything you need to know, but I'll teach you a lot in an hour. And I guess thanks for your time. And and if you, I'm pretty easy to find. Back to the digital marketing thing. If you go to Google and you type Mark Staton, 2 will come up. One of them is this person in Louisiana who sells alligator skin cowboy boots, and the other one is me. So just if you go to Google, you're not sure which one is me, and you want to send me an email about a question or anything, I'm the one that's in Bellingham that doesn't sell cowboy boots made out of alligator skin. So Meg, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Mark. This is really great.
And I will talk to you all next week.
Sounds great. Thanks.
All right. Bye.